right, just recently here, we had another state require that all public schools display "In God We Trust" starting this school year, and that state was Louisiana. If you can remember, I think it was several weeks ago, maybe like 3-4 weeks ago, South Dakota just passed a similar law. And there are actually some other states, I know Kentucky's another one, and there are a handful of other states that do have this law as well. But it's good to see this coming back into our schools. As you know, I think it was the 60s, the 70s, and on. We kept removing God from our schools, and that's had a devastating impact upon our culture. And so this is a step in the right direction. It's great to see this happen. Just a little bit about the motto, "In God We Trust." "In God We Trust" is the official motto of the United States of America. So if it's our official motto, why would it not be in every public arena, such as schools, courthouses, and the such? That was voted on by the U.S. I'll get into that in a second. But it's also the official motto of the state of Florida. It was adopted by the U.S. Congress in 1956 as a replacement or alternative to "E pluribus unum," which means "out of many, one." I don't really think it's a replacement, because "E pluribus unum" was really never officially the American motto. It was just assumed to be, because it was the words on the reverse side of the Great Seal of the United States. So it's really an alternative to, or this is really our official motto. The nation's official motto since the initial design of the great... Okay, I already talked about that. All right, moving on. A little bit more about it here. The Reverend Mark R. Watkinson of Ridleyville, Pennsylvania, in a letter dated November 13th, 1861, petitioned the Treasury Department to add a statement recognizing Almighty God in some form on our coins in order to relieve us from the ignominy of heathenism. All right, so that was a long time ago. In 1861 was when we had people trying to get "In God We Trust" on the coins, on our money. And so what was the purpose of that? Why did this guy want to do this? Well, this ignominy... I had to look up how to say that word. I've never heard it before. But it means something bad. It's a bad image of something. In other words, they didn't want people to think America was a heathen nation. And so they wanted to declare that we are one, that we are a nation that trusts in God. We have also, our other motto is "One Nation Under God." So they wanted to separate us from being, to let everybody know we're not a secular humanist nation. We're not a godless communist nation. We are a nation under God. Okay? I guess I'll read a little bit more. During the Cold War era, the government, this is from Wikipedia, by the way. During the Cold War era, the government of the United States sought to distinguish itself from the Soviet Union, which promoted state atheism. And if you look at what's going on in our country today, the leftists are trying to repeat this same thing. They're trying to make the state be godless. And what that does is it exalts the state to be God. Because every nation has a God. Well, they could say there's no God, they don't have a God, they're secular, but if they say they're secular, what they're really doing is worshiping the government or worshiping themselves. There's always a higher power. The question is which higher power do you have? Do you elevate man as God, or do you keep God as God, as we should? Which promoted state atheism and thus implemented anti-religious legislation. Hey, we're seeing that today. The LGBTQ movement is really, it's being used as a vessel to implement anti-religious or anti-Christian legislation. For instance, if I read from the book of Romans chapter 1, where it says that someone who is a homosexual has a reprobate mind. Now that's considered by many to be hate speech, and they're trying to make Canada already does it. If I was to go up to Canada and read Romans chapter 1 and teach it the way it was written, I could go to jail. So that's one step towards being like the Soviet Union or some other godless socialist nation. The 84th Congress passed a joint resolution declaring "In God We Trust" as, okay, we kind of talked about that. That was in 1954. The resolution passed both the House and the Senate unanimously and without debate. Okay? There was no question. Now, I laugh when people say, America's not a Christian nation, wasn't founded as a Christian nation. Well, hey, even if you try to say it wasn't, and that, there were some of our founding fathers that were deists, that's true, but the majority of them were Christians, especially the citizens. Even if you were to say, okay, it wasn't founded on Christianity, which it was, well, at this point, the Senate unanimously, without debate, declared that it was. Declared that we were a nation under God. And that is our motto. So, the law was signed by President Eisenhower on July 30th, 1956. Okay, I already mentioned that. It's kind of repeating it. I thought was really neat is, I've never heard a president say this before, even some of the ones that we thought that were conservative Christians, never had the guts to say what Donald Trump said, even though he doesn't appear to be a model Christian, if you would. But he at least says this: in America, we don't worship government, we worship God. And that's what the motto, "One Nation Under God," declares. We don't worship government, or "In God We Trust," we trust in God. We don't trust in man. We don't trust that we're going to be able to put all these superhero leaders in government and they're going to somehow create this utopia for us and we're all going to live, in peace and prosperity and everybody gets, to not go hungry and, everybody has 3 square meals a day and a house and everything. No, we trust in God to provide those things for us, not the government. And big difference. Whenever we trust in man, that's when a nation runs into deep trouble. Let me see here. Representative Charles Edward Bennett of Florida, when they adopted their model, when they adopted the nation's motto, "In God We Trust," this was part of his reasoning for it. He says he cited the Cold War when he introduced the bill in the House, saying, "In these days when imperialistic and materialistic communism," that's what we're dealing with today. It's called socialism or liberalism, leftism. They want all of, they think they want all the materials, but they don't want the source from which they come. They seeks to attack and destroy freedom. We should continually look for ways to strengthen the foundations of our freedom. So, in other words, the foundations of our freedom, we know if you go back in history and you study, how America became great and free, it was because it was based off of Christianity. Our morale, our laws, our culture, it was all based off of morality. You cannot have freedom, true freedom, without Christianity. It's never happened before. In fact, America's really the only nation it has ever happened where the people have governed themselves successfully for at least a period of time, and that was because the majority of the people were Christian. Now, you have the people that oppose this. Oh, how dare we put "In God We Trust." So in Kentucky, the leftists figured out a way to, a loophole in the law, because they were supposed to display "In God We Trust" prominently in the schools. So they framed a $1 bill with the small words "In God We Trust" in there. Sad. And this lady here, Brittany Pike, she wrote on, I think it was Twitter, this school year, Kentucky began requiring schools to place "In God We Trust" in the building. I absolutely love living in a school district that wants to follow the law while ensuring every student feels welcomed back regardless of religious beliefs. She says, thank you so much. Thank you very much, Fayetteville County Public Schools, for simply posting $1 with "In God We Trust." My kids don't feel awkward or excluded for not believing in any God. Let me ask this lady this question: why, if she lived back in the days of the Soviet Union, the godless Soviet Union, did people ever feel awkward or unsafe or uncomfortable there? The alternative to not having this stuff and the alternative to rejecting God is to have a miserable life controlled by dictators and tyrants and ruthless men. Now, if somebody's offended because of this and they feel uncomfortable, I'm sorry, but I don't really care, because this is our nation's birthright. It's our heritage. We were born this way. We don't have to please everybody and make everybody feel comfortable. Not, are we going to force them to become Christian? No, absolutely not. It's everybody's choice. But we shouldn't let them force us to remove God from our country and receive curses instead of blessings. So, anyways, let me go back to there. Anybody have any questions or comments on that?
I just think, like you said, it's, at this day and age, to have steps in the right direction it's uncommon. So it's just super encouraging. Now this is like the third one I've heard of now recently.
Right.
Just that in and of itself is encouraging, because it seems like everything is a step in the wrong direction right now. So that's great. Right,
and even when we had presidents that claimed to be Christian conservatives, besides Reagan. Things still always seem to go backwards.
Yeah.
And it is exciting to actually see things now going back the other way. Doesn't mean that the battle's over. It's only begun. We've only begun to fight back. But it's at least better than being a coward and laying back and just accepting the new status quo. When Obama was president, he was always trying to make us accept that, number one, he was trying to make us accept that we're no longer a Christian nation anymore. He would say that. But, the economy, they're trying to build this globalist utopia, all these elite leaders of the different governments. And they wanted to get it in our mind that we must now just accept that America's economy is going to always go downward. We're going to lose our manufacturing jobs because that's what's necessary for globalism. So just accept that it's going to suck and everything will be okay, is what they kept telling us over and over again. Yeah. And until Donald Trump came along and said, wait a minute, these guys are ripping us off. China's ripping us off, Canada, Mexico, and it's coming off of the backs of the common people.
Remember he said, I don't know how, he didn't say it, just like I'm paraphrasing, but I don't know how Trump thinks he's going to bring back all these jobs in manufacturing. Is he going to wave his magic wand, he said? And then I've seen a couple where they put the videos side by side, him saying that, and then like whatever the economy is flourishing now, and manufacturing and jobs are up, unemployment is as low as all these things. And so just like what you said, Obama thought that this is the status quo now. There's nothing to do about it.
And I think the reason why Donald Trump was able to do this so quickly is because all he had to do was just stop purposely destroying the economy at the benefit of trying to build a world government, a globalist utopia. So that's all he's really done. I mean, he's obviously a smart guy and everything, but anybody who had the courage to stop purposely, to be elected into office and to stop purposely destroying our country would be able to achieve some great gains, I think.
Well, and that's all in the name of environmentalism too, because Obama said he's going to put coal out of business. And that's our, I don't know, some 60-70% of our energy comes from coal.
Right.
And he started putting all kinds of, restrictions and things like that. And he was basically said, I'm putting them out of business.
Yeah.
So that alone, when Trump got in and got rid of all those restrictions, that alone was a huge boost to a lot of states that, thrive on coal and all that stuff. But it's encouraging.
Yeah. Do you guys think Heaven in God We Trust is a good idea to put up in schools?
Yeah.
Right? Yeah. And when the kids walk in there and they see that, it gives them a little bit of respect and reverence for God. Even it's not forcing them to believe, but it's it's back in the day before the 1960s, when people came here from other countries, they were supposed to assimilate into our culture. There were very I don't want to use the word rigid, but they had to test. They had to take tests of knowledge of our founding, of the founding of our country and stuff. So they had to know this stuff, and they had to at least show that they loved our country. Whereas now it doesn't matter. They just let anybody and everybody come in. It's like that would be like letting somebody into your house who hates you and despises you, and you feel like, well, I have to be welcoming. and then they come in and destroy everything and tell you you suck and you're horrible and I hate you. It makes no sense. All right, so let's...